Mummy, let us eat the leftover. The twins begged, their eyes full of hunger. The stepmother pretended not to hear and forced them to ask for food as punishment. Then, on that day, a millionaire man saw everything. What he did next not only saved those girls, but exposed a shocking truth. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know which city you're watching us from. Let's continue. The rain hammered against the cracked window of the small bedroom where Emma and Lily huddled together beneath a threadbare blanket. At 12 years old, the twin sisters had learned to find comfort only in each other. The house on Maple Street in Portland, Oregon, had never felt like home, not since their stepmother, Margaret, had taken them in after their mother's passing 3 years ago. Emma, the quieter of the two, pressed her face against Lily's shoulder, trying to ignore the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. 2 days had passed since they last ate, and the dizziness was becoming harder to ignore. Lily, always the protector, stroked her sister's hair and whispered reassurances she wasn't sure she believed. Margaret's voice echoed from downstairs, sharp and cutting as always. She was on the phone, laughing about something, her tone light and carefree. The contrast between that laughter and the cold silence she directed at the twins was a wound that never quite healed. To Margaret, they were not children who needed love. They were obligations, paperwork, monthly checks from the state that funded her lifestyle while they went without. When the house finally fell silent and Margaret's car pulled out of the driveway, Lily made a decision. She shook Emma gently. "We need to find something to eat. We can't wait anymore." Emma's eyes, mirror images of Lily's own, widened with fear. "What if she finds out?" "She won't. Come on." They slipped out through the back door, their worn sneakers barely making a sound on the wet pavement. The streets of Portland were bustling despite the rain, people hurrying past with umbrellas and shopping bags, none of them noticing two thin girls walking with their heads down. Lily led them toward the nicer part of town, where she remembered seeing cafes with outdoor seating. Maybe, just maybe, someone would have left something behind. A half-eaten sandwich, a forgotten pastry, anything. They stopped in front of a place called the Riverside Cafe, its large windows glowing warmly against the grey afternoon. Through the glass, Emma could see well-dressed people sipping coffee and eating elegant meals. Her stomach twisted painfully. "Lily, I don't think we should go in there," Emma whispered, tugging at her sister's sleeve. But Lily had already pushed open the door, the little bell above it chiming cheerfully. The warmth inside was overwhelming after the cold rain, and for a moment, both girls just stood there, dripping onto the polished wooden floor. A woman behind the counter looked up, her expression shifting from surprise to something harder. "Can I help you?" Lily swallowed her pride and stepped forward. "We were wondering if maybe you had any leftover food from customers who didn't finish. We would be really grateful." The woman's eyes narrowed. "This isn't a charity. We don't give handouts to street kids." "We're not asking for free food," Lily tried again, her voice shaking slightly. "Just leftovers, things you would throw away anyway." "You're making the other customers uncomfortable. You need to leave." Emma felt tears prickling at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had learned long ago that crying only made things worse. Lily's hand found hers, squeezing tight. "Please," Lily said one more time, her voice barely above a whisper. "I said leave. Now. Before I call someone to remove you." The words hung in the air like a slap. Several customers had turned to watch, their faces a mixture of pity and discomfort. But no one spoke up. No one moved to help. Lily turned to go, pulling Emma with her, when a voice cut through the tension. "That won't be necessary." A man stood from a table near the window. He was tall, probably in his early 40s, with kind eyes and an air of quiet authority. He walked toward them with measured steps, and Emma instinctively shrank back, but Lily held her ground. "These girls asked politely for something you were going to discard anyway," the man said, his voice calm but firm. "Your response was unnecessarily cruel." The woman behind the counter flushed. "Sir, I don't think you understand the situation." "I understand perfectly." He pulled out his wallet and placed several bills on the counter. "This should more than cover any inconvenience. I'd like you to prepare 2 proper meals for these girls, and I'd like you to apologize." The woman looked like she wanted to argue, but something in the man's expression stopped her. She muttered something that might have been an apology and disappeared into the kitchen. The man turned to Emma and Lily, his expression softening. "I'm Daniel Morrison. Why don't you 2 sit down?" They followed him to his table, moving slowly, as if expecting the kindness to evaporate at any moment. When the food arrived, 2 plates of warm soup, fresh bread and fruit, Emma and Lily stared at it like they couldn't quite believe it was real. "Go ahead," Daniel encouraged gently. They ate quickly, almost frantically, barely pausing to breathe. Daniel watched them with growing concern, noting the way they guarded their plates, the way they flinched when the server came too close. When they finished, both girls sat very still, their eyes downcast. "What are your names?" Daniel asked. "I'm Lily. This is Emma." "Where are your parents?" The question hung heavy. Emma looked at Lily, who answered carefully. "Our mother isn't with us anymore. We live with our stepmother." Daniel noticed the way Emma's sleeve had ridden up, revealing faint bruises in various stages of healing. His jaw tightened. "Does your stepmother know you're out here?" "She doesn't really pay attention to where we are," Lily said, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. Daniel made a decision. "I'd like to help you. Would you let me take you somewhere safe? Just for tonight, somewhere warm where you can rest." Emma's eyes filled with fear and she shook her head violently, but Lily, after a long moment, nodded slowly. "Okay." The drive to Daniel's house in the suburbs was quiet. The girls sat in the back seat, holding hands, watching the rain streak across the windows. When they arrived, Daniel led them inside, a spacious, well-kept home that felt more like a museum than a place where people actually lived. "You can stay in the guest room upstairs," Daniel said. "There's a bathroom attached. I'll find you some clean clothes." But when he returned with towels and a change of clothes, he found both girls pressed into the corner of the room, their eyes wide and watchful. Emma was trembling. "It's okay," Daniel said softly, setting the items on the bed. "No one is going to hurt you here. I promise." It took nearly an hour before they emerged cleaned and dressed in, clothes that were far too big for them. Daniel had prepared a simple dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and vegetables, but when he set the plates on the table, the girls descended on the food with the same desperate hunger as before. When they finished, they both looked up at him with identical expressions of wary gratitude. "What do you need us to do?" Lily asked quietly. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "To pay for the food. What chores do you want us to do?" The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. "You don't have to do anything. You're children. You shouldn't have to earn basic kindness." Emma and Lily exchanged glances, clearly not believing him, but too exhausted to argue. Daniel showed them to the guest room again, this time with fresh sheets on the bed and extra blankets. "Get some rest," he said. "We'll talk more in the morning." He left them alone, but sleep didn't come easily. Hours later, unable to shake his concern, Daniel quietly checked on them. What he saw made his heart ache. The 2 girls were curled together in the center of the bed, arms wrapped around each other like they were the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting beneath them. In the dim light from the hallway, Daniel noticed what he hadn't seen before. Bruises on Emma's arms, a faint scar on Lily's collarbone, marks that had been carefully hidden under long sleeves and high collars, marks that told a story of systematic, calculated harm. He closed the door gently and went downstairs, his mind racing. He had lost his own daughter, Sarah, 5 years ago to a terrible accident that still haunted him. The grief had nearly destroyed him, and for years he had simply existed, going through the motions of life without really living. But seeing these 2 girls, so broken and yet so resilient, something shifted inside him. He couldn't bring Sarah back, but maybe he could help Emma and Lily. Maybe he could give them the safety and love they so desperately needed. The next morning, Daniel made breakfast and waited. When the girls finally came downstairs, moving slowly and carefully, he gestured for them to sit. "I want to help you," he said simply. "But I need to understand what's happening. Can you tell me about your stepmother?" Lily and Emma looked at each other, communicating in that silent way twins often do. Finally, Lily spoke, her voice halting and uncertain. "Margaret took us in after our mum was gone, but she doesn't want us. She just wants the money the state gives her for taking care of us." "Has she hurt you?" Daniel asked gently. Emma's hand instinctively went to her arm, covering the bruises. Lily's jaw tightened. "She says we're ungrateful, that we should be thankful she even keeps us." "Are there other children?" Daniel asked, remembering something in the way Lily had phrased things. Emma's eyes widened and she looked at Lily with something like panic. Lily hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There were others before us, kids who came and went. Some stayed for a few months, then they were just gone. No one ever asked about them." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean, gone?" "They just disappeared. From school, from the house. Margaret would say they went to live with relatives or got adopted, but it never felt right." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. This was worse than he had imagined. Much worse. "Listen to me very carefully. What Margaret is doing is wrong, very wrong, and I'm going to make sure she can't hurt you or anyone else ever again." "How?" Emma whispered. "I have a friend who's a lawyer, a good one. We're going to fight for you." Over the next few days, Daniel contacted his attorney, Richard Chen, and explained the situation. Richard immediately began the process to obtain emergency custody of the twins, but the moment Margaret was served with the papers, everything exploded. She went to the media, painting herself as a devoted guardian whose children had been stolen by a wealthy man with too much influence and not enough oversight. The story spread quickly. Local news picked it up, then regional outlets. Suddenly, Daniel Morrison was not a good Samaritan, but a predator, someone using his money and connections to take children who weren't his. His business partners started asking questions. Contracts were put on hold. People who had known him for years looked at him with suspicion. The narrative Margaret had crafted was simple and compelling, and the truth was complicated and hard to prove. Daniel's past became fodder for speculation. His treatment for depression after Sarah's passing was twisted into evidence of instability. His unmarried status was presented as suspicious. Every aspect of his life was scrutinized and found wanting in the court of public opinion. But Daniel didn't back down. He couldn't. Not when he saw the fear in Emma and Lily's eyes every time Margaret's name was mentioned. Not when he remembered the bruises and the scars and the way they had asked what chores they needed to do to earn a meal. Richard worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses. But then they hit a wall. The judge assigned to the case, Judge Patricia Holloway, turned out to be an old friend of Margaret's. They had grown up together, attended the same schools, moved in the same social circles. Suddenly, every motion Daniel's team filed was delayed. Every piece of evidence they presented was questioned. Every witness they called was dismissed as biased. The scales of justice, which should have been balanced, seemed to tip consistently in one direction. Margaret, sensing her advantage, made an offer through her lawyer. She would drop the media campaign and relinquish custody quietly if Daniel paid her a substantial sum, enough to set her up comfortably for years. Richard presented the offer to Daniel, who read it with disgust. "She's trying to sell them like their property." "It would end this quickly," Richard said carefully, "and the girls would be safe." "No," Daniel's voice was firm. "If we pay her, she'll just do this again with other children. We need to expose what she's really doing." Richard nodded, having expected that answer. "Then we dig deeper." They started investigating Margaret's history, looking for patterns. What they found was disturbing. Over the past 8 years, Margaret had taken in 11 different foster children. All of them had left her care within months, and none of them had gone on to stable placements. The paper trail was thin, deliberately obscured, but it was there. Richard tracked down a former teacher from the girls' school, a woman named Susan Martinez, who had been fired 2 years earlier. When they met with her, Susan broke down in tears. "I tried to help them," she said. "Emma and Lily and the others before them. I saw the signs, the hunger, the fear, the bruises they tried to hide. I reported it to the principal, but he told me I was overstepping. When I kept pushing, they let me go. Would you be willing to testify?" Richard asked. Susan hesitated, then nodded. If it means those girls get away from her, yes. She brought with her something precious, drawings the children had made in her class. Art therapy, she called it, a way for them to express what they couldn't say out loud. Emma had drawn a picture of a small figure locked in a dark room, hands pressed against a door that wouldn't open. Lily had drawn two figures holding hands, surrounded by shadows with reaching arms. The images were haunting in their simplicity, and they told a story that words could not. Richard also discovered that Margaret's lawyer, a man named Thomas Brennan, had a history of representing clients in questionable custody cases. Further investigation revealed that he had been coaching witnesses, suggesting testimony that would paint Margaret in the best possible light while undermining Daniel's credibility. Armed with this new evidence, Richard filed a motion to have Judge Holloway recused from the case due to conflict of interest. The motion was denied, but the publicity around it forced the court to take a closer look at the proceedings. Meanwhile, Margaret grew desperate. She attempted to take Emma and Lily back, showing up at Daniel's house with police officers and a court order that Richard quickly proved had been obtained under false pretenses. The incident was caught on Daniel's security cameras, and the footage showed Margaret's true nature. The mask of the concerned guardian slipped, revealing someone cold and calculating underneath. The case finally went to trial, and the courtroom was packed. Margaret sat at the defendant's table, dressed conservatively, playing the role of the wronged woman perfectly. Her lawyer painted Daniel as a man trying to replace the daughter he had lost, using Emma and Lily as substitutes. It was a brutal strategy, and it hurt. Daniel sat through testimony after testimony, his reputation torn apart, piece by piece. But then Richard called Susan Martinez to the stand. She testified about what she had witnessed, about the children who had come and gone, about the system that had failed them repeatedly. She presented the drawings, and the courtroom fell silent as people looked at the images created by traumatized children. Then Richard called Emma and Lily themselves. The girls walked to the stand together, holding hands. The judge allowed them to testify side by side, recognizing that separating them would cause unnecessary distress. Richard asked them gently about their life with Margaret, about the hunger, the punishments, the fear. Emma, usually so quiet, found her voice. "We were never her daughters," she said, her voice small but clear. "We were just a way for her to get money. She told us that all the time, that we should be grateful she even bothered with us." Lily added, "There were other kids before us. We saw them come and go. We were so scared we would disappear too." "Do you want to go back to Margaret?" Richard asked. Both girls shook their heads emphatically. "No," Lily said, "never." "Where do you want to be?" Emma looked directly at Daniel, her eyes shining with tears. "With him. With Daniel. He's the first person who ever made us feel like we mattered." The courtroom was utterly silent. Margaret's lawyer tried to cross-examine them, to poke holes in their testimony, but every question he asked only made things worse for his client. The girls were consistent, honest, and heartbreakingly sincere. Finally, Richard presented one last piece of evidence, a letter written by Emma and Lily together, addressed to the court. In it, they described their life with Margaret in painful detail. They wrote about going days without food, about being locked in their room as punishment, about watching other children suffer the same fate. And they wrote about Daniel, about how he had seen them when they were invisible to everyone else, about how he had given them kindness without expecting anything in return, about how, for the first time in their lives, they felt safe. The judge read the letter in silence, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she looked at Margaret with something like disgust. The verdict came swiftly. Margaret's guardianship was terminated immediately. She was ordered to cooperate with an investigation into the whereabouts and well-being of all children who had previously been in her care, and full custody of Emma and Lily was granted to Daniel Morrison. Margaret's face went white, then red with fury. She stood, shouting about injustice, about corruption, but the bailiff escorted her out as her lawyer frantically tried to calm her down. Daniel sat frozen for a moment, unable to quite believe it was over. Then Emma and Lily were there, throwing their arms around him, and he held them tight, tears streaming down his face. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I promise you're safe." The months following the trial were a journey of slow, careful healing. Daniel had expected that once the legal battle was over, everything would simply fall into place. But trauma, he learned, doesn't disappear with a judge's ruling. It lives in the body, in the reflexes, in the small moments that catch you off guard. Emma still flinched when doors closed too loudly. Lily still hoarded food in her room, unable to trust that there would always be enough. Both girls woke up screaming from nightmares, reaching for each other in the darkness, needing the reassurance that they were still together, still safe. Daniel hired a therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in childhood trauma. The sessions were difficult at first. Emma barely spoke, and Lily answered questions with the bare minimum of words. But Dr. Chen was patient, and slowly, week by week, the girls began to open up. It was during one of these sessions that the full scope of Margaret's actions came to light. The investigation that had been ordered by the court had uncovered something far worse than anyone had anticipated. Over the course of 8 years, Margaret had cycled through dozens of foster children, collecting stipends from the state while providing minimal care. The children were fed just enough to avoid obvious signs of neglect, clothed in second-hand items, and kept isolated from meaningful social connections. But the most disturbing discovery was what had happened to the children who had disappeared from Margaret's care. Investigators tracked down 7 of them, now teenagers and young adults, scattered across different states. Their stories were heartbreakingly similar to Emma and Lily's: hunger, isolation, psychological manipulation. Margaret had perfected a system of exploitation that flew under the radar of an overburdened child welfare system. One of those children, a young woman named Rachel, reached out to Daniel directly. She was 19 now, working 2 jobs to support herself, but she had never forgotten the twins. She had been in Margaret's care 4 years earlier, and she remembered Emma and Lily as tiny 7-year-olds, already learning to make themselves invisible. "I tried to protect them," Rachel said when she met with Daniel at a coffee shop in downtown Portland. Her hands shook slightly as she held her cup. "But I was only there for 3 months before Margaret sent me away. I told my caseworker what was happening, but no one listened. I was just another troubled kid with a history of behavioral problems." "It wasn't your fault," Daniel said gently. "You were a child yourself." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "Are they okay? Emma and Lily?" "They're healing. It's slow, but they're getting there." "Can I see them?" Daniel hesitated. He would have to ask the girls first, but something told him this might be important for all of them. "Let me talk to them. I think they'd like to know you remembered them." When Daniel told Emma and Lily about Rachel, their reaction surprised him. Lily's face lit up with recognition, and Emma, who rarely showed strong emotion, actually smiled. "Rachel was kind to us," Emma said softly. "She used to sneak us food when Margaret wasn't looking." The reunion happened a week later, in Daniel's living room. Rachel walked in nervously, and for a moment she and the twins just stared at each other. Then Lily crossed the room and hugged her, and Emma followed, and all 3 of them were crying and laughing at the same time. Rachel became a regular presence in their lives after that. She was like an older sister, someone who understood what they had been through in a way that even Daniel, with all his compassion, could not. She told them about her own journey of healing, about the therapy and the setbacks and the small victories. She showed them that it was possible to build a life after trauma. Meanwhile, the legal consequences for Margaret continued to unfold. She was charged with multiple counts of child endangerment and fraud. Her lawyer, Thomas Brennan, was disbarred for his role in coaching witnesses and manipulating evidence. Judge Patricia Holloway faced an ethics investigation that would eventually lead to her early retirement, but Margaret herself remained defiant. Even as the evidence mounted against her, she maintained that she had done nothing wrong. She claimed she had provided for the children, that they were exaggerating, that this was all a conspiracy orchestrated by Daniel and his expensive lawyers. The trial was covered extensively by the media, and public opinion, which had once been so firmly against Daniel, shifted dramatically. People were horrified by the revelations about Margaret's systematic exploitation. The same reporters who had questioned Daniel's motives now wrote sympathetic profiles about his dedication to Emma and Lily. Daniel found the attention uncomfortable, but Richard convinced him that it served a purpose. "This story is shining a light on failures in the foster care system," Richard said. "That's important. It might lead to real change." And it did. The state legislature launched an investigation into oversight procedures for foster care placements. New regulations were proposed, including more frequent home visits, mandatory reporting from teachers and medical professionals, and better tracking of children who moved between placements. Emma and Lily watched these developments with a mixture of hope and sadness. Hope that other children might be spared what they had endured. Sadness for all the kids who had already suffered, whose stories might never be told. As the one-year anniversary of their rescue approached, Daniel noticed a change in the girls. They were more confident, more willing to try new things. Emma had joined the school choir, her soft voice growing stronger with each performance. Lily had discovered a love of painting, creating vibrant, colorful works that were a stark contrast to the dark drawings she had made years earlier. They still had hard days, days when the memories were too heavy, when the fear crept back in. But they also had good days, days filled with laughter and normalcy and the simple joy of being children who were loved and protected. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Emma asked Daniel a question that had clearly been on her mind for a while. "Why did you help us? That day at the cafe you didn't know us. You could have just walked away." Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "I had a daughter once. Her name was Sarah. She would have been about your age now." Girls had known this in a vague way, but Daniel had never spoken about Sarah directly. They waited, sensing this was important. "When I lost her, I thought my life was over. For a long time, I just went through the motions, not really living. But then I saw you two, and I saw children who needed help, and I realized that maybe there was still a purpose for me. Maybe I couldn't save Sarah, but I could save you." Lily reached over and took his hand. "You did save us. You gave us a life." Emma nodded, her eyes. "Serious? We want to help other kids too, kids like us." "How?" Daniel asked, though he had a feeling he knew where this was going. "We could start something," Lily said, her words coming faster now, excited. "A place where kids who've been hurt can go, where they can feel safe and know that someone cares." Daniel felt his heart swell with pride. These girls, who had every reason to turn inward and focus only on their own healing, wanted to reach out to others. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Let's make it happen." Over the next several months, Daniel worked with Rachel, Richard, and a team of child welfare experts to establish a foundation. They purchased a large property on the outskirts of Portland, a beautiful old house with extensive grounds. It would serve as a resource center for children who had experienced abuse and neglect, offering therapy, educational support, and a safe space to just be kids. The question of what to name it was answered by Emma and Lily themselves. They wanted to honor their mother, the woman who had loved them before she was gone, whose absence had set them on this painful path. "The Claudia Ferreira Foundation," Lily said, "after our mum." Daniel learned that Claudia had been an immigrant from Brazil, a single mother who had worked multiple jobs to provide for her daughters. She had been kind and loving, and her passing had left a void that Margaret had exploited. On the day of the foundation's opening, a crowd gathered. Former foster children, now adults, came to share their stories. Social workers and therapists came to offer their support. Local politicians came to make speeches about reform and accountability. But the most important moment came when Emma and Lily stood at the entrance beside a plaque that read, "The Claudia Ferreira Foundation, a place of hope and healing." Emma, who had once been too afraid to speak above a whisper, addressed the crowd with a clear, steady voice. "My sister and I know what it's like to feel invisible, to feel like no one cares if you're hungry or scared or hurt. We know what it's like to think that this is just how life is, and it will never get better." Lily continued, "But we also know what it's like when someone sees you, really sees you, when someone decides that you matter, that you deserve safety and love and a future. They spoke about Daniel, about Rachel, about Dr. Chen, and all the people who had helped them rebuild their lives. They spoke about their mother, whose memory had been a light in the darkest times. And they spoke about their hope for the future, for all the children who would walk through these doors seeking refuge. When they finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Daniel stood beside them, his hand on each of their shoulders, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since before. Sarah's passing. The foundation thrived. In its first year, it served over 100 children, providing counseling, educational support, and advocacy. Emma and Lily, now teenagers, volunteered regularly, offering peer support to younger kids who were just beginning their own healing journeys. Margaret was eventually convicted and sentenced to prison. The judge, a different one this time, spoke sternly about the betrayal of trust and the exploitation of vulnerable children. Margaret showed no remorse even at the end, but it no longer mattered. She could not hurt anyone anymore. On Christmas Eve, 3 years after that rainy day at the Riverside Cafe, Daniel, Emma and Lily sat together at the dinner table. The house was warm and filled with the smell of cooking food. Rachel was there too, along with Dr. Chen and Richard and several other people who had become part of their extended family. As they prepared to eat, Lily raised her glass of sparkling cider. "I want to make a toast to second chances, to people who see us when we're invisible, to family, however we find it." "To family," everyone echoed, glasses clinking. Emma smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "And to Mom. We're doing this for her, for all of them." Later that night, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, Daniel found the girls in the living room, looking at old photographs. There was one of their mother, Claudia, holding them as babies, her face radiant with love. "She would be so proud of you," Daniel said softly. "We hope so," Emma replied. "We're trying to honor her memory by helping others. You're doing more than that. You're changing lives. You're making sure that what happened to you doesn't happen to other children. That's an incredible legacy." Lily looked up at him. "You're part of that legacy too. You started all of this by caring when you didn't have to." Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. "You three saved me as much as I saved you. You gave me a reason to live again." They sat together in comfortable silence, 3 people who had found each other in the midst of pain and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and gentle, covering the city in a blanket of white. Inside, there was warmth and love and the quiet certainty that tomorrow would be better than yesterday. The Claudia Ferreira Foundation continued to grow, expanding to serve more children, advocating for policy changes, and shining a light on the failures of systems that were supposed to protect the vulnerable. Emma and Lily, once invisible and forgotten, became voices for those who had none. And Daniel, who had thought his purpose ended with Sarah's passing, discovered that love and family could be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest healing comes from helping others heal.